My name is Marc Kinchen. I go by the name of MK. I started as a producer about 20 years ago, producing a lot of house music, dance music, then started doing more pop music, R&B music, then switched back to doing more dance music and DJing now. And right now I've just been on the road a lot, just DJing a lot, and I just did a deal with Sony Records. So I'm working on my album right now.
Cool.
And that's where this baby comes into the place. I started out in the late 80s just being a teenager and learning about music, and I've always been like probably most people watching there are like just really into gear and learning about equipment, and that's where I was. I would learn how to produce and having friends that also produced and that could afford mixing boards. And I would end up working at their place, a guy named Kevin Saunderson, who's a pioneer in techno music. I would go to his place and he had like this giant board. The funny thing is I kind of knew how to use it already just from reading so much. And so I would just be hands-on, just like, this is great. And eventually being able to afford some of the stuff, some of the equipment. I did a song called Burning in early 90s. It's just a club record. I ended up putting out myself. And a lot of the underground house DJs ended up really liking the record. And that turned into a record deal. In the early 90s, remixing became really popular. It started to become really popular. So record labels would hire you to take one of their records and to basically do whatever you want with it. And I got pretty good at that. A lot of times, a record label would say, we want you to remix. They would literally send me a copy of the 2-inch tape. And so from that point, I would hire out a studio, basically any studio I wanted, but that fit the budget. And a lot of times there was an SSL in that room, like the big one. And so I spent a lot of time on those in the early 90s, and they were pretty expensive. So I couldn't afford one, but I used to use them a lot, and you kind of just wish you had one. I never really stopped making music. I always made music, but just never really, I kind of stopped pursuing it so hard. The 90s house music started becoming popular again, and I had no idea. And a lot of stuff I did in the 90s was pretty popular in the 90s, and it started to come around again. And Lee Foss reached out to me. He's a DJ. Him and Jamie Jones, they have a label called Hot Creation. And Lee got in touch with me. He said, hey, I had never met him before. He said, I want you to DJ at one of our parties. A couple of my friends who are still in, they're like, that's Lee Foss and Jamie Jones, dude. You're like, that's crazy, you gotta do it. So that's when I started to step into DJing. And so that was basically the start of me becoming a producer and a DJ. And my first love being just making house music, because it's more, like I said, it's more of you can do this without anybody telling you what to do. And I always liked that better. I got into DJing, and then I thought, like, I can start making house music again, finally. Then you can make your house music, you go DJ, you play the house music that you make, and it just kind of just started working, And at the same time, Pitbull sampled one of the songs I did in the 90s called Nightcrawlers, Push the Feeling On. So I started working with Pitbull. So I was doing that and DJing. So now I'm like, wow, everything's like coming together now. Like I'm making music commercially, and I'm also doing music underground where I'm not dealing with the record labels. And after having so much success doing DJing and producing my own music, I kind of left that other part behind, because I'm making just as much, if not more money, doing it this way than doing pop music. And that's when, I started to like, all right, let's get some equipment. In the 90s, you can do a song for Jay-Z, becomes a big hit. All of a sudden, every artist, every label is trying to hire you to do music, to paying you a great fee to produce these songs. Now, in the early 2000s with the internet, the fees got killed. It's not about record sales anymore. It's about having a song out, and then what can you do with that song? And for artists want to put a song out so they can go tour. Producers and DJs want to put a song out so they can get called to play more. You know, I had a song called Look Right Through by Storm Queen that I remixed, and my mix went #1 in UK. And after that song went #1, the bookings went through the roof. I have a song that I did this summer, went #4, #5, called My Head is a Jungle. I did that, the bookings go through the roof. I've done some pop music. I've heard what the A&Rs have said on why something doesn't work, why it doesn't work. You know, as an artist, you don't always want to agree with them, but you do listen. And you kind of take what they said, and well, at least I do. I try to apply it to anything I do, even if it's a house track, even if it's underground, techno, whatever. You still try to have some of the elements that make people like a song. Yeah. And I think I'm able to incorporate little bits of that into house music, where you wouldn't really think that it works, but it's all music. It's all like a certain, you know, structured, knowing your scales, knowing your patterns and all that stuff. You can make it work. You know, as a producer, you always want a mixer, you know. And so I was literally shopping for a mixer, and I was looking at some of the smaller SSL ones, like the Matrix I was thinking about, and it's like when you're looking at a car, you know what I mean? You look at all the types of cars that Porsche has. They have this car, this car, this car. Eventually, you start going towards the bigger one, whether you can afford it or not. And I pretty much did that. The bad thing, as soon as I bought it, I had to go on the road like the next day. So it got delivered. I took pictures of it outside. It got delivered, and I had to go travel for like 2 weeks. So I was sitting in my room like, you know, like, I can't wait to go home. You know, it's like a kid in a candy store, really. So far I mixed one song on it since I've had it. I remixed a song called Reverse Skydiving by Hot Natured, which is Lee Foss and Jamie Jones, their group. And it was the first time I did a mix on it where not in my computer, I spread everything across the faders and literally, like, you know, sat there and EQ'd my kick drum, my hats, and messed with the levels, and it was great. A little more convenient because of the way it works with Logic and Pro Tools. You know, it's like you can switch from analog to digital, and it's perfect. I think just the sound of it, I mean, you can tell an analog sound between, well, not most, but for me, I can tell the difference between just digital and analog, and just a good warm sound, and having the compression, the master bus compression is something I always wanted. You know, it's even different from using it from an outside rack unit, but just having it on the desk, having it right there. You know, a difference of having a mixer, just a pure analog mixer, and having to patch everything in to a different channel, and then, like I said, recall, and then looking at a piece of paper and see where you patch everything. By it being half digital, it kind of keeps it all together. If you're working just a computer, if you want to lower, you know, you want to change your kick drum, you're usually grabbing the fader with the mouse, lowering it, then you roll over to the hi-hats or roll over somewhere else. Here, like, I'm used to, you know, moving a couple things at one time, and just being able to, like, grab a couple bass line chords, a kick and a snare. You can kind of move it together, where you can't do that with a mouse. Back in the 90s, I used to mix songs that weren't automated. So I used to tell somebody, all right, hit record, and I'm mixing the song live with the mutes, you know, and it's like, you can't beat that. So sometimes when you're writing your drops and you're automating everything, you kind of lose a little bit, as opposed to, like, going live and you're like, oh, if this comes out right now, it'll be perfect, and you just hit it. A lot of younger kids don't realize that because they've never done it before. A lot of times when I would be in the box, sometimes the sounds are kind of, you think they're EQ'd enough, you know, and again, just EQing with the track bar and mouse, it just doesn't feel the same as being able to grab a low frequency, high frequency that quicker than, change your low frequency, scrolling over to high frequency. That little bit of time scrolling over actually does make a difference because your ear gets adjusted by the time you get to high frequency. You're used to it, or you want to pull up another plug-in. Here you can just like bam, 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 bam. I could definitely work quicker, and just the sound, it just sounds better. It's like you have SSL EQ in your house, right in front of you. The real thing. I was definitely able to make this mix that I did on here sound bigger because I can really just separate the sounds better and get a grasp of what's going on, more so than just mixing it inside the sequencer, inside Logic, Ableton, Pro Tools. I use them all, and it's like I'm able to tell the difference in all of them. But then pulling it up here, you really have to hear it to understand what I'm trying to say. Yeah, I love it. Yeah. I love it. I'm like, what else can I do with it? So I'm home for a while, so I'm excited to learn a lot of the features using the DAW. I took the first 8 and had that analog. So like my Pro Tools rack was the first 8, and I had 9 through 24 set to Logic. And I didn't know you can do that. I'm like, this is so cool. You can have the actual audio here and have, move your Logic faders here, all right in front of you. That was amazing. Can't wait to get my hands on it. Like I said, I've had it for a couple months, but I've been on the road for a couple months. This is like the first time I get to sit down and get my hands in it and open up the manual. So,
Excellent.
I'll have more to say later.
Great.
But cool. So far, I'm really happy.